Welcome to the Media Roundtable Industry Edition, where we dive deep into the events and topics around the business of audio through the lens of the brands and buyers who support it, or as we like to call them, Chief Audio Officers. I'm your host, Jennifer Laine. We're sad to miss James Cridland, editor-in-chief at Podcast Business Journal this week, but he's traveling and sends his best, and he'll be back on again in the coming weeks. That said, we're not lacking for expertise, talent, and insight on this episode today, as I'm joined by Kyle Jelinek, our Senior Director of Client Strategy. Hi, Kyle.
I like to call it Kyle Strategy, actually. But so yes, happy to be
Kyle Strategy. Stew Redwine, VP of Creative Services and creator of the Virtual Fools podcast. More on that later. Hi, Stew.
Yes, me and the entire creative services team. Great to be here.
And Stephen Abraham, president of Oxford Road. Hi, Stephen.
Hello.
Welcome to the show, gents. All right, let's break down this week's top industry news. To begin, a few quick honorable mentions. We don't need to dive into these unless you guys have strong opinions, but just some FYI on the industry. Spotify is launching a personalized in-app merch hub. So, as mentioned, they're launching this. It provides personalized merch recommendations based on your listening habits. You can now conveniently, across all artists and merchandise in one place, make purchases through Spotify's partnership with Shopify. Spotify says connecting listeners with ways to support artists is key to fulfilling its mission of enabling artists to live off their art. This is something they've done a lot on the music side in the past, so it's not necessarily a new functionality, but not that we'll ever see traffic and sales numbers. I doubt we will. I'd be curious to see if they are sort of on par with that of music artists. We've seen a rise in hosts promoting their merch recently. I mean, I listen to SmartList a lot and they are promoting it nonstop. So, I mean, yeah, I'm sure Spotify will be taking a little bit of sales commission, but hopefully this drives more traffic their way. I mean, would anybody, Kyle, would you buy your favorite podcast host merch through Spotify?
Yeah, for sure. In fact, I think I was maybe part of like a beta test of this thing with some tickets to an event that was close by my house, literally at a bowling alley, of an artist that I watch all the time, I listen to all the time on Spotify. And I got like a really last minute opportunity to buy tickets, and they were very limited. And I got in because I listened. He's like my top two artists. And I actually foresee this not only for merch, but a way to maybe open up a completely new avenue for ticket sales, which could be really interesting because, hey, we're only going to go for these super exclusive events to the very best, highest, biggest fans that we can possibly get. It's pretty interesting. And they have the data to support that.
All right. I guess do we have any data around how many podcasts actually produce merch? I'm not sure we do.
Just to specify the question, are you talking about podcasters merch or artists merch?
Podcast merch. So it would be like SmartList sells hats or Call Her Daddy has t-shirts. These are the elements that you would now be able to buy on a Shopify site through Spotify. So not new necessarily, but new for podcasts. It's always been around for artists.
But I think they're expanding their reach on a lot of this, like different kinds of, avenues of revenue, which is really interesting. I love to see what they're doing over there.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the mission. So we'll see. All right, number 2 in rapid fire. 2/3 of sports fans engage with radio and podcast, a study finds. A study by CrowdReact Media reveals that 63% of sports fans engage with radio and/or podcast, emphasizing the importance of audio in building sports communities. Meanwhile, 40% of sports fans aged 18 to 39 listen to sports podcasts. The study also highlights a preference for live sports content, with 57% of fans surveyed participating in sports betting. Football remains a dominant favorite sport, capturing 84% of respondents' preferences. For those who would like to read more on this, please find the white paper linked in the newsletter. We'll be sharing it this week in the Influencer. Stephen, I know you have a particular passion for sports podcasts. We've done a lot of work across sports podcasts with clients, et cetera. And I think you're a sports podcast listener. No?
Very much so. Yeah. Obviously, the word football becomes slightly confusing for me, and I appreciate that when we say football, we're talking specifically about the domestic marketplace. If we're going to use the US vernacular, soccer would, in fact, I think, from a global perspective, be the single largest fan community-based sport. And yeah, I mean, I think sport and any sort of live event or immediacy in terms of an entertainment value or sort of areas of immediacy are really important for the space. Podcast by its very nature tends to be something that you download, sits on your smart device, you go back to it in your own time, whereas something like a sport event, you don't catch it in that moment, or you don't listen to it in that moment, you're not going to go back. And it's what I think we've started to define, or at least I'm starting to define, as perishable media. And you sort of start talking to fans of different sports teams, whether that be the MLS, Premier League, NFL, NBA, or whatever. They're all fans in the same way, and you can capture them in a really interesting environment. And I think what we've seen with a lot of the sort of companies that we're working with is how do we build those communities who may not overlap, but in terms of pure 1+ reach, you can really get fantastic levels of sort of increased penetration and coverage to those groups by utilizing them. Men in Blazers is a great example, and they're extending their footprint globally. I think they're opening an office in London in the next few weeks to start producing and to start talking to more international audiences about the sports opportunities. So I don't know if there was a question in there. I'm just waxing lyrical about my passion for sports podcasts, but yeah.
No, there wasn't, but you answered anything better than I would have prompted you to answer. So yeah, I mean, I think like one of the interesting things that I think is very singular to sport, as you pointed out, is the really strong communities. I mean, yes, there are tons of listeners to different podcasts. There are like Smart List listeners, Call Her Daddy listeners, all the other shows are like definitely listeners. And sometimes the community is brought together through live events, but sports communities are like nothing else, where they just want to know everyone else who is listening, and they want to celebrate together and watch together and listen together. And I think there's a huge opportunity there that we've only scratched the surface of, and as it seems continues to grow. And especially that live element, I think, I don't know, we don't necessarily have anyone from the performance side on the show, but I wonder if you'd be able to track ad performance in live sports podcasts more specifically or more frequently or accurately than you could in just a regular show, because the long tail is varied.
I don't know the answer to that question, but I mean, I tend to listen less to the live ones, although I know they're very popular. For me, it's more about a pre-game discussion and then a post-game discussion, which I think if I miss one of those, I don't bother going back to it. I'll just wait for the next week. But the live ones, I don't listen to the live ones because I'm usually watching the game.
Yeah.
Sport is still quite a visual medium, I think, isn't it?
Totally. And like, to your point of perishable media and not going back, I think that's really different in YouTube. Like in YouTube, you would go back and you watch different highlights or maybe a really incredible goal or something like that. Whereas in podcasts, it just doesn't come across the same way.
Yeah. I mean, the drama in any sport is what drives the conversation. And, I think amping up those dramatic things. Was that a penalty? Was that a foul? Was that a red card? 95% of the conversations are around that stuff, not whether they played well. And that's the beauty of what you can get into with all the fans kind of being visceral and passionate, which is what it's all about. And I think podcast plays to that.
Yeah. And the recap as well. Like if you're a recap on a show, you have a certain set time. You're like, you have to talk about this show's recap for 5 minutes. Whereas in podcasts, you can just sort of dive in and debate until the conversation is through in a way that I think would come through to fans in a better or sort of more meaningful way. Okay, moving on to today's meat of the conversation. And part of that is actually sort of a taste of what's to come. We'll call it an amuse-bouche for an episode that we have hitting in 2 weeks. So Ashley Carmen released a really interesting article on our newsletter this week called Apple Considers Selling Podcast Ads on Original Shows. Definitely worth a read. We'll absolutely have it linked in the newsletter for all of you guys to click through. Obviously, we're huge fans of Ashley Carmen. We love her. But what we're most excited about is she penned one of the most informative articles we've read on a topic, and that is, what is a download? And at Oxford Road, we've been really working on defining that over the last several months, and we are putting together an episode that will be released 2 weeks from today with Brian Barletta, who also wrote an article on this recently in his newsletter, Sounds Profitable, as well as with Pete Bersinger, who is founder of Podscribe. And so we're going to dive much deeper into this. What is a download? Stay tuned. 2 weeks from today, we are going to try to answer some of the questions that remain. We're going to add definitions around what that means, obviously, what it doesn't mean, how to measure it, et cetera. But it was definitely worth referencing because the Ashley Carmen article just came out. That being said, stay tuned as we're going deeper into that topic. Main stories. So we have 3 big stories this week that we want to work our way through, and they each build sort of on one another. And we're starting with one that sort of builds on what Stephen and I were talking about building communities and who you trust and who you don't trust. And a lot of the voices that you listen to are those that you trust based on topics that you care about or teams that you care about. But a recent study came out that said podcasts are the most trusted media personalities among US consumers. This is according to an Acast research study. So I'm just going to call out a few of the points that they made, and then we're going to open it up to discussing this in more detail. But a new study by Acast reveals that podcasters are highly trusted among US consumers. 64% of podcast listeners actively seek out podcasters and make time for their content, outperforming all other media personalities. At a time when trust in the US media is low, podcasters are emerging as trusted figures. Half of podcast listeners, 50%, trust podcasters the most of any other form of media or any other media personalities. YouTube is a close second. And podcast also excels in product endorsements, with 75% of listeners considering podcasters' recommendations. This, I don't know if this surprised you. I mean, any of you, Stephen, Kyle, Stu, obviously we know that podcast is a really intimate channel. We know that you feel like you're forming a personal relationship with podcast hosts. You're listening to them time and time again. But I mean, to have a channel where audiences are arranging their time around being able to take in this content and to trust them. They're saying they're not trusting news personalities. And it cited a lot of sort of where those fractures arose, from COVID to Ukraine to the most recent conflict happening in Israel right now. And I think that I wasn't necessarily surprised to know they were trusted, but I was surprised to find out they were the most trusted. And I would be curious to hear all of your perspective on why you think this is, whether or not you were surprised, and what that means for brands specifically.
I can start. I mean, I think podcasting in particular, at the very least, gives the illusion of an unfiltered connection with the audience. More so than television by far, more so than radio. I think from the consumer's perspective, I'm listening to this person share their unfiltered thoughts on whatever the topic may be. And whether it's about their personal recommendations in the reads or whatever the hot topics that they're talking about on the show, podcast gives at the very least the illusion. I think many times it actually is that, where they are just pulling down the curtains and saying, like, this is what I think about this. I mean, we've had podcast hosts that straight up say, I'm not going to endorse this product because I don't believe in it. Okay, great. I appreciate that. Value your integrity. Let's move on. So this is not surprising at all. In fact, I think the numbers seem maybe even smaller than I would have thought.
With half the people trusting podcast hosts the most of any other form of media.
Where else are we going to trust them?
Yeah.
All right, so tell me if you've ever heard of any of these companies. Indeed, Shopify, NetSuite, Headspace, Quip, Theragun, Postmates. You know, I'm not only the host of the Media Roundtable, but also CEO of a company called Oxford Road, and we are the world's leading independently owned and operated audio ad agency. And what that means is that we help great companies, many that you have probably heard of on some of the other podcasts that you listen to. We help them test and scale campaigns in audio channels, with podcast being one of those leading channels. Some of the work that we do includes media planning and buying, as well as analytics, attribution, and insights. And we also have a very special way that we deal with creative and copy generation. We have our own proprietary process called Audiolytics that allows us to score ads for their persuasiveness. If you're looking to be involved in audio and you want a partner that can help work with you to make sure that you achieve unprecedented ROI and massive scale, you should get in touch with us at Oxford Road. And by the way, the only reason that we're able to do the work of the Media Roundtable is because we have a great team at Oxford Road that supports us and makes it possible. So, you know, what we're doing is not just a podcast, but we're really trying to help brands live out their values and balance that with their business objectives, which is an increasingly hard thing to do in this world of misinformation and malice that's infecting so much of our media. But at Oxford Road, we don't want to just broker this stuff. We want to impact the industry for good. We want to raise the bar on what gets created. And Oxford Road is helping make that possible through the Media Roundtable. So if you're somebody that's interested in working with an ad agency or a partner on this type of work for your advertising campaigns, go to oxfordroad.com. It's easy to spell. And get in touch with us, or at least just sign up for our free newsletter, The Influencer. That's oxfordroad.com.
Yeah.
And I think
No,
there's some
I
inherent
don't know.
trust. I think there's some inherent trust built in, and the fact that it is only auditory. So when you're watching something, it's like, you know, your eyes can be fooled or whatever, but not being able to see them. If you're not doing it with simulcast or whatever, it's completely built on this relationship that you're just hearing their voice. And it's also really interesting that, you know, audio is processed in the same part of the brain as emotion, and you're singling in on that, and you're having to imagine everything that they say. So it's just such like a reciprocal, trusting, intimate way to communicate in only hearing a voice. It doesn't surprise me. I would think the number would be even higher of the amount that people try. I mean, I think of the host that I listen to the most for hours and hours each day. And it's like, yeah, there's pretty much whatever it is that they're peddling, I'm going to end up being very interested in, especially if they make that personal connection and they talk about how they've actually used the thing or trust the thing or inspected the thing themselves.
Do you think it matters across, do you think it's like blanket across genre pretty even, or do you think it varies a lot?
I think it probably varies by format. So if the host, or like by style of the show. So if the host is very much like Pivot, let's say, with Scott Galloway and Kara Swisher, like you can hear like the reverb of the rooms that they're in. They talk about how they're at their apartment, or, oh, I was just in LA. Like it sounds very much like, oh, these are these people, like I'm in their life, and like they're giving these reads. If it's a super polished thing, or maybe a fiction podcast where there's some more degrees of separation between you feeling like you're really in their life, I think you could probably see a difference in the way that those messages come across. But if the show itself is just like, this is this person being raw and ready all the time, and then that's how they come across in their ad, of course that's going to connect more and cause more action to be taken.
Are these conversations you're having with brand marketers when they hand you non-negotiable scripts?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's our job. And I think part of the job too is that you never stop. You never want to take a no from somebody that can't say yes. And so I think inside of a brand, it's easy to get hypnotized by the things. Well, I know they're going to say no to this. I know legal's going to say no. It's like and in an agency that can happen too. You can get hypnotized with the same thing. Going, oh, the suits are going to say no. Legal's, no, we got to keep pushing. We got to keep pushing. They might say yes. And it's not even that they might say yes. That's not the end game. It's that we have thought about it and looked at it and see that this would cause a good result. So let's keep pushing for it. And then what's amazing is time and time again, you see that sooner or later, it does break through. But if you stop asking, if you're not Sam I am on that stuff, what would you like it on a train? Would you like it on a plane? Would you like it on a boat? Would you like it with a goat? If you stop asking, it just kind of like disappears into memory. And then next thing you know, your copy just gets flat. You stop even asking for the integrations. And then all of a sudden somebody has to come along and reinvigorate the thing. So we want to always be pushing and pushing and pushing.
Somebody once told me that trust is built with raindrops and lost with buckets. And I think like trust in media right now is incredibly hard to find. And if we have it in podcast, what is our responsibility as an agency and speaking to brands? Like, what is our responsibility for brand marketers in order to keep it? Like,
Save the live reads.
wait, is Dan here?
No, but I mean, that's the way to keep it. Like, listen, the way you keep the trust is to keep having those hosts do it and keep the hosts not using AI voices, keep having the hosts speak from their heart, keep giving them bullet points, giving them the product and letting them speak from, a perspective of actually using what we give them and endorsing and saying, I use this and you should too. And here's why.
And something that
go ahead.
Oh, and that's something that was established in the world of radio, right? And that's maybe something that we're going to see evolve in podcast, and that a pricing structure will even be different. Because if we accept the premise, it's all just the same. It all, again, gravity just pulls it all down into this all dynamically inserted, all cloned voices or whatever. And no, what's distinct? You want to talk about a distinct sonic asset? It's a host's voice. It's a host's personality. It's who they are. Well, maybe a premium needs to be charged for that then. For those live reads, maybe that unit needs to be treated differently. And then next level down is them reading it, announcer reading it. Next level down, fine, clone version of their voice. That's fine. Maybe you just disclose it. But in order for the trust to remain there, I'm with Kyle on that. It's like, yeah, let's hashtag save the live reads for sure.
And I'd also say, I would add to that, like, if we're not getting that personal endorsement, we're not getting all those, like the extras, we shouldn't be paying the premium for that. Like, you're not going to do a personal endorsement, then we're not going to pay the high CPM.
100%. The whole point of doing it is because you're getting that unique opportunity to hear from the host in a very organic and sort of native way within the context of the show. So yes,
but oftentimes we hear like, oh, we're moving towards a programmatic way of distributing the ads. CPM is not going to change, FYI, but it'll be good. It'll be just as good. Like, no, it's not. And then those don't end up on buys anymore.
Well, thank you for softballing me into the next topic, which is Kyle's favorite, and his part-time job is AI voice live reads or AI voice commercials. Stu, this is your article. So Descript's big feature was focused around AI and new AI voices and more. Can you walk us through what this was and why it's such a powerful or sort of cautionary tale?
Yeah, I think it's a powerful tool. It's Descript hung back a little ways this year in particular in doing any updates, but they've been in the AI game now for a couple years. Anyway, the point of the story is they just did a big feature release. And so there's a bunch of functionality. We use Descript on the Ad Infinitum podcast, but I have not dove into these new features. So I'm going to be interested to look at it. In looking at it a little bit, it looks like it's just better, stronger, faster. So there used to have to be like a waiting period to get approved on converting a voice to a cloned version. I'm sure there's increased functionality on removing stuff like ums and ahs. But it was kind of interesting because Descript had not had an update, and then they've got a great video that you can watch. Now they have updated the software. So like I said, I haven't had a chance to play around with it a bunch, but I think it's a sign of there's so many people active in this space of AI or generative AI in audio. And this is just another example of another tool being put out there to make it even easier.
I have a question for you. For those who aren't
Heavens
familiar
to
with
Murgatroyd. What?
For those who aren't familiar with this script, can you share with the audience sort of what their whole POV is?
Yeah, so Descript is a all-in-one platform where you can do. It started out as like transcription and text to speech, but they've got screen recording, video editing, all the features that you need in one place to handle video and podcast production in one like simple platform. So anyway, wrapping up on the all or nothing thing is that, there's power in these tools that, like, if we were doing this podcast and one of us were to say something and we just needed to change like one phrase with consent, of course, from all the hosts, it's like, it's so great because you don't need that person to go do a pickup line and just record that one line. You can type it in and fix it, right? That's the kind of thing Descript is great for. Is you ingest the audio from your podcast, it transcribes it all, names all the speakers. You can add in clone voices. You can add in, the speakers' voices themselves to have patch in phrases and export it all in one slick platform. And now they've got way more AI powered tools as well.
And in regards to like tone, pace, natural delivery, sort of on par with where it should be, or how do you feel 1 out of 10?
I'm gonna say it depends on what it is. That's what's they're getting better all the time.
Cool.
With all of the tools, it's like you could probably have the right string of words with the right voice, and there's nothing that's going to give it away. But in every single one of the tools, there's always, so far, and we're messing around with this stuff all the time, and that's what we'll be talking about next. Without fail, there's some kind of mispronunciation. There's some little thing that'll give it away where you're like, they say the word they put the emphasis on the wrong syllable. But you can buff it out. I've yet to play with the one that's just like flawless all the time, but I've sure not met a person on a human being that's flawless all the time, either.
Yeah.
Well, the difference is you can't whisper into the computer's ear and say it's pronounced Stew Redwine, and then they get it. You got to type it out in a way that the computer says Stew Redwine.
Well, yeah, exactly. You put a space in between. You trick them out is what you do, right? Like we've used a few different ones. So you do, like, let's say it wouldn't say my last name right, Red Wine. It's saying Red Win or something. It's like type it in all caps, or separate the words with 3 ellipses, or like you start to develop these codes to like fake out the AI to get it to pronounce it the way that you need it to.
Yeah. That's what we're learning, is this new coding of AI. Yeah. Copy to recording. Yeah.
Well, speaking of new voices to fake people out, this brings us to our last and potentially the most heated topic that we're addressing today, and that is Virtual Fools AI podcast. All right, Stu, walk us through what this is. This straight from the top.
So Virtual Fools is the result of the creative services team here at Oxford Road setting out to experiment with as many of the AI tools, generative AI tools, AI powered creative tools as we could. Earlier this year, starting, first thing this year, first episode that we released was in February, but we set out to make a podcast with these short little episodes. It really was like, if you think of the Pixar shorts at the beginning of Disney movies or at Pixar movies, where, they they focus on one aspect of visual effects, like they're working on hair or water effects in a short film to learn what they can so then they can apply it in the next film. That was the same idea going into Virtual Fools. It's like, okay, we can wait till there's a client that wants to trust us with their money to do something with, hey, can you have AI write a song? Hey, can you have AI voice this? Hey, like, could you replace the voice of our founder? Well, we got to sell it through. And a lot of times, I mean, of course we have success doing that, but why not put our money where our mouth is as a creative services team and just do it? And so that's what we did with Virtual Fools. And there's 10 episodes. Each one, we took a slightly different angle, or I took a different angle with each episode on something else to try to learn. And the main thing was like, okay, we're going to have Chat GPT write it, or whatever, whatever the different tools are that we used to write it. And then we're not going to, we tried to tamper with it as humans as little as possible. So, and I know Kyle has come to appreciate it because he was like a faithful listener to all 10 episodes, where it's just funny when you don't mess with it to hear what the AI, how it strings together a sentence, and then how the AI clone voices pronounce stuff. We're like, we didn't want to buff it out. Like, we just wanted to let it ride. And we had the music made by AI. The scripts would call for sound effects at certain places. We used those sound effects in those places. Did the artwork with AI stuff. Like I said, just to bend and, just to stretch ourselves and learn as much as we could about using generative AI in audio. And you can listen to it. We can link to it. And then my favorite episode is a true crime episode.
All right, Stephen, Kyle, expand on this. How do you feel about it? What did we learn? I guess, Kyle, from an accounts perspective, like, what were any key learnings that we're able to apply or share with account directors or and brand marketers?
I think the dream of this is we can type out all these iterations of copy, whether it be geo-contextualization or like, hey, are you sitting here in this city wearing these clothes today or whatever? Like, the dream of what we could do with all the iterations. That all sounds great, but in practical use, what we're finding is AI is not quite there yet because it still requires human oversight. The way that the AI technology is going to implement all these iterations is not where it needs to be. And so I think that for me, at least, it's still funny, right? Like, you see, like, you watch or listen to the Virtual Fools podcast, like, you're in on the joke because you know that this is AI, and when they make these hiccups, it's kind of laughable and still fun. But you can also see where this is heading, and you can kind of see what the future will bring.
Yeah, and like we did an episode with we tried a couple different tools where we did a clone version of my voice, and there's a couple phrases in there where you go like, wow, for me it's like, it's indistinguishable for me listening to go, oh, it nailed it there. That's powerful. We're able to directly apply that stuff over to, founder as spokesperson might be a great way to apply this, where there's, absolute alignment from the top and buy-in to go like, it's just impractical to get a founder in the booth to record spots all the time. That a lot of times is the hang up, even though it's a powerful persuasion tool. So that's a great one. To me, that's a great example of cloning a voice that has some real benefit.
Well, I guess going back to the trust conversation from earlier, if podcast is the most trusted media outlet currently because of that personal relationship that audiences have with their host, if they were to find out that their host has been generated by AI for the past couple of episodes or couple of minutes, I mean, that is a super highway to that trust just going down, plummeting further down through the floor. Don't you think?
Quite possibly. I think it depends on the host, and I've had conversations, off the record with different hosts, and it's interesting. Some of them are like, no, never. And others are like, sign me up, please. I don't want to read another ad. And I've got to think that their attitude, that if their listener has that same kind of attitude as they do, with oftentimes it's kind of like hosts are like, Oh, you know how owners and their dogs, like they kind of look like their dogs. Sometimes I sometimes feel like people that listen to certain podcasts look like the host of the podcast. So if they have the same kind of attitude as the host of Laissez-Faire or whatever, like that's like, I don't care. I don't care if it's a clone version of them reading that. I think in certain contexts it would work against you. I think in other contexts it would be fine. It would be critical to disclose it. I think in most cases it'd be important to disclose it.
I
But
say
like
every case, if we're going to start having host endorsements done by AI, I think it has to be disclosed, right? If it's a host
yes.
endorsement, 100%.
Yeah. I mean, we're saying I use this and you should too. If they're saying that they use it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think
of course.
it's like, I think if this is Rogan's voice, we talk about Joe Rogan, like if this is Joe Rogan's voice, like Joe Rogan, we need to say this is not really Joe Rogan saying it.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with
I
that.
think we're going to see a lot of
disclosures.
Yeah.
There has to be.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, then you're going to have the errors turn up. People go, "What?" It's going to. I think your point is very fair there, Jennifer. It does debunk the sort of the trust element, and I don't think hosts will allow it. There might be certain areas that can be used when they're recording, but not the core meat of a conversation or an interview. It's counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I was
Perhaps
thinking
for
that as well, is that
athletes.
it's like maybe it'll be interesting to see perhaps how the contracts are drawn up, because if they're using it only to do the promo code or something to that effect, but like Steve's saying, if it's the meat of it and them saying the I statements, that's still their voice. But using the technology to maybe patch in the city name, how is that any different? Like, how is that any different, any less or more sincere than Ryan Seacrest goes into a booth and he records a spot? And I just love this time of year in blank, and then he records 50 city names. Okay, that's artifact. Like, that's not real. He didn't say the full statement together.
It's exactly the same. It's just machine augmenting it quickly.
Exactly that. So in that case, we don't disclose, hey, everything you're about to hear this host say on this podcast, we actually cut out 67 ums and 24 ahs, and there was 12 seconds in this statement that we took out. So it's
no, but I would say, like, I would argue that in radio, for example, radio got in trouble a couple years ago where like they were pre-recording segments. Now, if you listen to radio, I still listen because I'm old. It'll be like portions of this next segment are pre-recorded. Like just those disclaimers and whatever that is. Like, I don't care if it was recorded an hour ago or 2 hours ago or yesterday.
But disclaim it.
But they have to disclaim it.
It's just going to be an optimization tool in this sense. I think it's going to be challenging as it takes on more and more potential sort of, promotional reads, because it's really difficult to get AI to speak within a brand's voice. Yes, it can be iterative, or yes, it can be literal in what it's being asked to say, but in that voice and the certain sentiment, I don't think it's ever really going to truly replicate it. It's augmentative, and that's what it should be, to facilitate a better experience for the listener, but not if it's going to be to the detriment of the quality of the show.
And there's the whole question of people, the best performers, like I think in painting or in other arts, it's like, okay, what makes it valuable is its scarcity. So we had a campaign we were working on with Kyle where the talent did not want their voice cloned even to change out one section of the script. Like, do not clone my voice at all. Do not clone my voice at all. I will record that. I'll record the 50 things or the 100 things or the whatever thing, the amount of variants that are needed. So it's just, it'll be, I was like, well, okay, well, what if the contract only stipulates only this, and it'll only be used for this usage? Cause that's kind of, in my mind, I keep trying to go back to like, okay, if we set it up as this is different than anything that's ever gone before and there's nothing like it, then that's how we're going to see it and how we're going to solve for it. But if we set it up as, okay, there's nothing new under the sun, we've kind of tackled problems like these before. Okay, well, let's just limit the usage on the clone voice. So we're only going to clone this, and we're only going to use it for this, which is for all intents and purposes, the same as you going into the booth and recording those things. Even in that condition, talent's going, no, thank you. If you want me to do it,
Yeah.
I will do it.
Yeah, it can't replace. This is the big discussion. People seem to think is it going to replace me? No, it's going to augment. It's not going to replace. And I think that was something I heard, on many instances, in many instances recently, and especially was a key takeaway from the Code 23 conference in Laguna a few weeks back. AI should not be replacing, it's going to be augmentative. And I think that's the message here.
And that's what we found with Virtual Fools is it was such a powerful, it's such powerful tools. And it was such a powerful experiment to go. It's like, it's not necessarily it's not to make our creative job easier and so we can check boxes faster. It just increases the possibilities, right? It helps us. We can very quickly go like, what would that sound like? What if it had like an Old West thing and it's like they're coming to do a shootout, but it's with toothbrushes? You can like, whoosh, you can get that created and hear it really fast, where it used to be in one creative's head. They're like, oh, well, I can hear it. Let me try to, it's kind of like you can now like break through a lot faster. You can go into Chat GPT and go, give me 100 ideas on this. And what I find in the day in, day out of it is, 10%, 5%, 2% are actually ideas that then connect to another idea that creates some breakthrough. So it's like what I find with all of these tools is it helps a lot with the creative blocks that can happen. And then it has sped up the ability to hear what you have in mind and even present what you have in mind in audio to somebody very quickly. And then you go, like you're saying, Steve, you get the real deal produced with real humans, with real instruments and the whole deal. But man, you can go from concept to be able to play an example very, very quickly now, if you lean into it.
Thank you for joining the Media Roundtable.
You're welcome.
As always, this podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road, where we want you to succeed in audio and use influence for good. As members of the marketing community, we have the power to advance voices that don't just entertain, but edify, to build bridges across differences and preserve fair-minded discussion around the most important topics of our age. If you're a marketer looking to align your brand values with extraordinary business outcomes, reach out to our agency, Oxford Road, by visiting oxfordroad.com and subscribing to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any feedback or suggestions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at info@mediaroundtable.com. Thank you to everyone on the show today, Stephen, Kyle, Stew, and to Bianca Haley and the team at Podcast One. As always, influence responsibly.